I never argued with the woman who ruined my life. That terrified her more than anything I could have screamed. For 11 months, I smiled at Vanessa Kate in meetings while she rearranged my company, my marriage, and my name into something unrecognizable. I nodded when she spoke over me. I said that's a fair point when she took credit for work I'd done at 2 in the morning while my husband slept beside a phone he thought I hadn't noticed buzzing at odd hours. People who watched us in the same room assumed I was weak. My own mother-in-law once pulled me aside at a dinner and whispered, "Naomi, honey, you have to fight for what's yours." I told her I was fine. I wasn't lying, exactly. I just wasn't fighting the way anyone expected. I was building something. Quietly. The way you build a case, not the way you build a scene. This is the story of how I lost everything in front of 40 people at a company all-hands, and how, 4 months later, I watched the woman who took it from me lose it all in front of 300. My name is Naomi Reyes. I was 34 when this started, a co-founder and creative director of Meridian Design Group, a boutique architecture and interior design firm my husband Daniel and I built from nothing in a spare bedroom in Logan Square, Chicago. 8 years. 11 employees. A client list that included 2 James Beard adjacent restaurant groups and a hospital wing that got written up in a design journal I still keep a copy of in my desk drawer, dog-eared at the page with my name on it. Daniel handled the business side, contracts, vendors, the parts of running a company that make your eyes glaze over. I handled the creative side and, if I'm honest, most of the actual client relationships, because Daniel was better at closing a deal over drinks than managing one over a 6-month renovation. We weren't a perfect team. We argued about budgets and timelines the way any 2 people who love the same thing but see it differently do. But we were a team. I believed that the way you believe the sun will come up. Vanessa Kate walked into our office on a Tuesday in March with a leather portfolio and a business card that said Growth and Brand Strategy Consultant and a smile that made you feel, for exactly 4 seconds, like you were the only interesting person in the building. Daniel had hired her. He told me over dinner, casual, like he was mentioning he'd ordered new business cards. "We need someone who understands scaling," he said. "We're leaving money on the table, Naomi. I found someone sharp." I should say here, I wasn't threatened by a consultant. I'd worked with plenty of contractors, freelancers, brand people. What I noticed, in the first week, wasn't Vanessa's competence. It was her attention. She asked Daniel questions she already knew the answers to, just to watch him explain things to her. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She touched his arm when she made a point, the kind of touch that lasts a half-second too long to be professional and a half-second too short to be anything you could point to. "You're imagining things," Daniel said, the one time I mentioned it. Not defensive exactly. Amused. Like I'd said something a little embarrassing. "She's good at her job, Naomi. That's called charisma. It's literally what we're paying for." I let it go. Not because I believed him completely, but because I didn't have proof, and accusing your husband of something you can't prove is a way of making yourself the villain in your own story. I'd seen other women do that, turn suspicion into a weapon before they had a target, and I didn't want to be that. So I watched instead. Quietly. I started noticing things the way I notice load-bearing walls in old buildings, not because anyone points them out, but because you learn to see what's actually holding the structure up. By May, Vanessa wasn't just consulting. She had a desk. By June, she was in client meetings I hadn't scheduled her for, introduced as part of the Meridian leadership team, a phrase that made my stomach drop the first time I heard Daniel say it out loud to a client, easy as breathing, like it had always been true. When did she become leadership? I asked him that night. She's basically running growth strategy, babe. It's a title thing. Doesn't mean anything legally. He didn't look up from his laptop when he said it. It meant something. I just didn't know how much yet. The first real blow came in September, at our quarterly all-hands. 11 employees, a conference room with too much natural light, coffee going cold in paper cups. Daniel ran the meeting, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the deck. He put up a slide titled Meridian 2.0, a new chapter, and the first bullet point read, Leadership Restructuring Effective Q4. I sat there in my own conference room, in my own company, and read my job being taken from me in 12-point font. Given our growth trajectory, Daniel said, and I noticed he wasn't looking at me, we're formalizing some roles. Vanessa will be stepping into Chief Strategy Officer. I'll remain CEO. And Naomi will be transitioning to he paused, just a fraction, the pause of a man reading a script he didn't write himself, a design consultant role. Part-time. To give her more flexibility. Nobody in that room breathed for 2 full seconds. I felt 11 pairs of eyes swing toward me like a searchlight. Priya Anand, our lead architect and the closest thing I had to a friend at Meridian, actually put her coffee down like she needed both hands free for whatever was about to happen. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I remember very specifically deciding, in that half-second, that whatever I did next would either confirm every unflattering thing Vanessa had probably said about me behind closed doors, or it would tell her nothing at all. I chose to tell her nothing. That's an interesting direction, I said. My voice came out level, almost pleasant. Let's talk after the meeting, Daniel. Vanessa was watching me the way you watch an animal you're not sure is actually asleep. I smiled at her. Just a small one. Professional. And I watched something flicker behind her eyes, not triumph, which is what I expected. Something closer to unease. Like she'd rehearsed this moment with a version of me that screamed, and my silence had knocked the whole scene off its rails. That flicker was the first thing that told me I was going to win. Daniel followed me into my office, though I already understood, watching him walk in like he had every right, that my was becoming a word with an expiration date. Don't do that face, he said, before I'd said anything. What face? The calm one. It's worse than yelling. That told me more than he meant it to. My calm unsettled him. Good. I filed that away. Explain the restructuring, I said. In detail. Not boardroom language. Actual detail. He rubbed his jaw, a habit from when he used to have hard client calls, back when we were partners in every sense of the word. The business needs someone focused entirely on strategy and growth. You're incredible creatively, Naomi, nobody's saying you're not, but you've never wanted to touch the financial side, the investor conversations, I built half the client list you're using to have investor conversations. I know that. Then say that in the meeting you just ran. He didn't answer. He looked, for one unguarded second, like a man standing at the edge of something he'd already jumped off of and hadn't told anyone yet. Is this about Vanessa? I said. Not a question. A door I was opening for him. This is about the company, he said, too fast. Daniel. I kept my voice soft. Almost gentle, which I think confused him more than anger would have. Is this about Vanessa? He looked at his shoes. It's complicated. Complicated. I've thought about that word a lot since. People use it when they want credit for honesty without paying the price of it. Okay, I said. And I meant it, in a way he completely misread. He thought okay meant I was accepting the restructuring. What I actually meant was, okay, now I understand the shape of what's happening, and I can start responding to the real thing instead of the story you're telling me about it. I didn't fight him in that office. I asked 2 more questions, flat, factual, the kind a lawyer asks, though I didn't consciously think of it that way yet. What was my new compensation? Did I retain any equity voting rights? He didn't have clean answers to either, which told me the restructuring hadn't been fully thought through, or that it had been thought through by someone who assumed I'd be too hurt to ask. That someone was Vanessa. I was almost certain of it already. I just didn't have proof. Not yet. Here's what I did that week, while everyone at Meridian was whispering about how surprisingly okay Naomi seemed. I requested, in writing, a copy of our original founding partnership agreement, the one Daniel and I signed 8 years ago at a table in his parents' kitchen, back when we had $4,000 between us and a dream that felt bigger than either of our fears. Most people don't reread their founding documents once the company's running. I did. That night, at my kitchen table, with a glass of wine I didn't finish, I read every clause twice. Clause 7, Section C nearly made me put the glass down and laugh, the kind of laugh that isn't happy, just disbelieving at how close I'd come to never checking. Any material change to executive leadership structure, including the creation of new C-suite positions, requires written consent of both founding partners with equal voting shares, regardless of operational title changes. Daniel couldn't legally make Vanessa Chief Strategy Officer without my signature. He hadn't asked for my signature. Which meant either he didn't know the clause existed, entirely possible, since he'd always let our lawyer and me handle the boring paperwork, or he knew and was hoping that I wouldn't notice until it was already done and awkward to reverse. I called my cousin Elena, a corporate attorney in the city who'd looked over our original agreement pro bono as a wedding gift, back when this whole thing started as a favor between family. I didn't tell her everything that night. I just asked her to confirm what I was reading was as ironclad as it looked. It's airtight, she said. Whoever wrote this clause for you knew what they were doing. She paused. Naomi, what's going on? I'm not sure yet, I told her, which was true. I might need you soon, though. I didn't confront Daniel with the clause. Not yet. A weapon you reveal too early is just a warning. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I used it. Priya found me in the break room 2 days later, refilling my coffee with the kind of unnecessary slowness people use when they're deciding whether to say something. You should know, she said, voice low. Vanessa asked me for access to the archived project files last week. Old client contracts. Stuff from before she even started here. Why would she need that? That's what I asked. She said it was for a brand history deck. Priya's eyebrows did the thing they do when she thinks someone's lying badly. Naomi, she went through the financial folders too. I saw the access log. She was in there for 2 hours on a Saturday. That was the second piece. Vanessa wasn't just repositioning herself in the org chart. She was digging through years of financial history that had nothing to do with brand strategy. Don't tell anyone you told me this, I said. Obviously. Priya hesitated. Are you going to be okay? I don't know yet, I said, honestly. But I'm going to find out what she's doing before she finds out that I noticed. Priya studied me for a second, the way she studies a floor plan when something's not adding up structurally. You're planning something. I'm paying attention, I said. That's all. She smiled, small and a little sharp. That's scarier than planning, coming from you. 3 weeks into my new part-time consultant role, a title I accepted publicly, calmly, while privately keeping every email and every meeting invite I was excluded from, I got a call I didn't expect. Robert Reyes. My father-in-law. Robert was a retired contractor, the kind of man who built half of it with his own hands before Daniel and I ever put pen to paper. He'd never fully warmed to Vanessa, though he was too polite, or too old school, to say so outright at family dinners. He asked me to meet him for coffee, alone, which had never happened in 8 years of marriage. I'm going to say something my son wouldn't want me to say, he told me, stirring sugar into coffee he wasn't going to drink. That woman isn't a strategy consultant. I did some digging. What kind of digging? The kind a man does when his gut's been bothering him for 6 months. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a printout, a LinkedIn profile, an old one, archived, from 4 years back. Vanessa Cade, listed under a different last name, Vanessa Reddick, as Senior Business Development, Holloway Capital Partners. Holloway Capital, I repeated. The name meant nothing to me yet, but Robert's face told me it should. They're a private equity group. Small, aggressive, buys up boutique firms, design, architecture, hospitality, right when they're at their most valuable, right before the founders realize what they're worth. I did a job for a guy in Milwaukee 2 years back, family furniture business, for generations. Same pattern. Consultant shows up, gets close to leadership, restructures from the inside, and 6 months later the company's being acquired for a fraction of what it should be worth. The consultant gets a cut. The family gets a check that feels generous until they realize what they gave up. I sat with that for a long moment. It reframed everything, not as one woman's personal vendetta or seduction, but as a system. A method. Vanessa hadn't fallen for Daniel by accident. She'd been sent, in a sense, to find the weak point in our foundation, and she'd found it in 8 years of a marriage that had quietly stopped being a partnership and started being two people running parallel to each other, tired, distracted, easy to separate. Does Daniel know any of this? I asked. Robert's jaw tightened. I tried telling him in June. He said I was being paranoid. Said I never liked her and I was looking for reasons. He looked at me, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw something like an apology in his face, not for himself, but on behalf of his son. I should have pushed harder. You're pushing now, I said. That's what matters. I took the printout home. I didn't show Daniel. I photographed it, saved it in 3 places, and began, that night, the actual architecture of what I was going to do. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters more than the parts of this story that make me look composed. There was a night, about 4 weeks into all of it, when I sat in my car in the parking garage 2 blocks from the office because I couldn't make myself walk in yet, and I couldn't make myself go home either. I'd just come from a client lunch where the client, a woman named Diane who ran the restaurant group we'd worked with for 6 years, mentioned, casually, over salad, Vanessa said you're moving toward more of an advisory role these days. Exciting chapter for you, getting to step back a little. Step back. Like I'd chosen it. Like 8 years of my life folding into a footnote was something I'd requested. I smiled through that lunch. I always smiled through those lunches by then. But sitting in that garage afterward, I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself in front of anyone, ugly, gasping, the kind of crying that has nothing elegant about it. I thought about calling my sister. I thought about walking into the office and telling everyone exactly what I knew, consequences be damned, just to stop being the only person carrying the weight of it. I didn't do either. I sat there for 20 minutes, and then I did something small and specific. I opened my notes app and I wrote down exactly what Diane had said, word for word, time-stamped, another small brick in a wall. I was building one humiliation at a time. Then I fixed my makeup in the visor mirror and went back to work. I tell people now that the hardest part wasn't the plan. The plan, once I had it, gave me something to hold on to. The hardest part was every ordinary moment in between, the lunches, the meetings where I had to watch people treat my own diminishment as unremarkable, where I had no plan to hide inside, just the raw fact of being underestimated in real time on a loop, for months. Over the next 6 weeks, I did 3 things simultaneously, and I did all 3 without raising a single alarm. First, I quietly reconnected with 3 of our biggest clients, the hospital system, one restaurant group, and a boutique hotel chain we'd been in early talks with, under the guise of transitioning relationships as part of my new consultant role. In those conversations, conducted over coffee and lunch, never in the office, I listened more than I talked. I learned that Vanessa had already started renegotiating 2 of our existing contracts, quietly lowering our design fees in exchange for what she called long-term partnership guarantees, a move that made no sense for Meridian's profitability, but made perfect sense if you were trying to make the company's short-term numbers look leaner and more efficient ahead of evaluation. She was prepping us for acquisition. Robert was right. Second, I asked Elena to formally review the company's cap table and recent financial filings, using my rights as an equal founding partner, rights that, thanks to Clause 7, Vanessa's promotion had never legally activated. Elena found something Vanessa clearly hadn't expected anyone to check: a series of consulting invoices submitted under Vanessa's name, routed through a shell entity called Cade Strategic Partners LLC, for amounts that vastly exceeded her original contract terms, invoices Daniel had approved without running them past me, because, as CEO, he technically could, for anything under a certain threshold. Vanessa had structured every invoice just under that threshold. Dozens of them. It added up to just over $200,000 over 8 months. That wasn't proof of fraud on its own. Consultants get paid. But combined with the Holloway Capital connection, it painted a picture. Vanessa wasn't earning a strategy fee. She was being paid, indirectly, to hollow the company out from the inside, position it for a lowball acquisition, and collect a finder's fee on the back end, a fee that would likely dwarf anything on those invoices. Third, and this was the part that required the most nerve, I began recording. Not secretly wiring myself, nothing dramatic like that. I simply started keeping meticulous written records of every meeting, every conversation, every offhand comment Vanessa made in front of others, time-stamped in a private document Elena helped me structure so it would hold up if this ever became a legal matter. I wrote down the day Vanessa told a junior designer, half joking, "Naomi's sweet, but this industry doesn't reward sweet." I wrote down the day she told a client, in front of me, "We're modernizing some of our older creative processes," implying my work was outdated, while standing in a building we'd designed together that had won 3 awards. Every slight went into the file. Not because I needed to relive them. Because they were data, and data, unlike feelings, can be presented in a room full of people and believed. Around week 7, something shifted in Daniel. He started coming home later. He stopped meeting my eyes at dinner, which we still had together most nights, an old habit neither of us had consciously decided to keep, the last thread of a marriage neither of us had officially ended. One night in October, he came home and sat at the kitchen table without taking his coat off, which was unlike him. I was doing dishes. I didn't stop. "Vanessa wants to move the acquisition talks up," he said, quiet, almost to himself. I turned off the water. What acquisition talks? His face did something complicated, the face of a man realizing, mid-sentence, that he'd just said something out loud he hadn't meant to say to me yet. There's a group interested in a majority stake. It's a good deal, Naomi. It would set us both up. You'd walk away with more money than you'd make in 10 years at the current pace. Which group? Holloway Capital. He said it like a normal business name. Like it hadn't been sitting in a folded printout in my desk drawer for 6 weeks. I kept my voice level. I'd had practice by then. And Vanessa's been talking to them directly. She has relationships in that space, yeah. It's part of why I brought her on. Daniel. I dried my hands slowly, giving myself time, giving him rope. Did you know Vanessa used to work for Holloway Capital? As an employee. Not a consultant. An employee, 4 years ago. His face changed in a way I'll remember for the rest of my life, not shock exactly. Recognition. The recognition of a man who'd had a small, nagging doubt for months and had just watched it get confirmed by someone he'd been avoiding believing. That's not, she told me she used to do deal advisory work, freelance, I repeated. For the exact company that's now trying to buy us at what I'm guessing is a discount, while she's been quietly restructuring our contracts to make our numbers look weaker than they are. He sat very still. How do you know all this? Because I've been paying attention, I said. Which is apparently a novelty around here. He didn't defend her. That was the first time in 8 months he hadn't defended her, and the silence told me more than any confession could have. I watched a man realize, in real time, that the woman he'd risked his marriage for might not have wanted him at all. She'd wanted his signature. I need to see everything you have, he said finally, voice hoarse. Not yet, I said. He looked up, surprised. Naomi, if this is real, I said, then I need it to be undeniable before anyone confronts her, including you. Especially you. Because right now, if you go to her and say, my wife thinks you used to work at Holloway, she has months to cover her tracks, and we lose whatever advantage I've spent 7 weeks building. So no. Not yet. He stared at me like he was seeing someone he didn't fully recognize. Maybe he was. The version of me that existed before that September meeting wouldn't have been capable of saying no to him about something like this. That version might have handed over everything out of relief that he was finally listening. I wasn't that version anymore. It took 3 more weeks to set the final piece in place, and it required something I hated agreeing to, patience with Daniel's guilt, which had turned, almost overnight, from distance into a desperate, clumsy kind of devotion. He wanted to fix things fast. I needed him to sit still. I need you to do exactly one thing, I told him, the week before our next scheduled board meeting, a meeting Vanessa had pushed to formalize the leadership restructuring permanently and to present preliminary acquisition terms to our 2 minority investors. Let the meeting happen the way she's planned it. Don't warn her. Don't change the agenda. Just let her present. You're going to say something in the meeting? I'm going to let the paperwork say something, I said. I just need her to present the deal in front of everyone who has the authority to stop it. What Vanessa didn't know, because Daniel, for once, kept his mouth shut, driven by something between fear and hope that I actually knew what I was doing, was that I'd spent those 3 weeks doing something else. I'd used my still active, still legally protected founder access to request an independent financial audit ahead of any acquisition vote, a right explicitly granted to either founding partner under Clause 11 of our agreement, triggered automatically by any acquisition offer above a certain valuation threshold. It was a clause neither Daniel nor Vanessa had thought to check, because neither of them had read the founding agreement as carefully as I had. Vanessa had assumed, reasonably, from her experience with other small firms, that founders who'd been sidelined administratively had also been sidelined legally. She'd never been wrong about anything so completely. The audit, conducted by an independent forensic accountant Elena recommended, confirmed everything Robert's tip and my own digging had suggested. Cade Strategic Partners LLC was a single-member entity registered to Vanessa Reddick, her legal name, with a mailing address that matched a corporate suite used by 3 other shell companies, 2 of which had documented ties to prior Holloway Capital acquisitions. The consulting fees paid to her weren't just generous. They were, per the auditor's language, inconsistent with market rate for the stated scope of work and suggestive of an undisclosed conflict of interest. I had it all. The audit. The invoices. The old LinkedIn history Robert found. Screenshots, timestamped notes, contract renegotiations that made no financial sense unless you understood the real goal was suppressing our valuation. Elena had built it into a single, clean document, the kind you could hand to a room full of skeptical investors and watch their faces change in real time. I didn't tell anyone what I was walking into that boardroom with. Not even Priya, though I asked her, gently, to make sure she attended the meeting instead of sending a junior designer in her place, the way she sometimes did for logistics-only agenda items. "Something's happening," she said, reading my face. "Something's happening," I agreed. "Just be there." 3 days before the board meeting, I nearly lost everything. I'd stayed late to print the physical copies of the audit. I wanted paper in that room, something people could hold, something that couldn't be dismissed as a slide someone had rushed together. The office was supposed to be empty. It was almost 10 at night. I heard the front door before I heard footsteps, and by the time I registered both, Vanessa was already standing in the doorway of the small conference room I'd commandeered, the one with the printer, the one where 6 manila folders sat open on the table with her name typed across half the pages in them. "Working late," she said. "Light. Too light." My whole body went cold in a way I hope I never have to feel again. I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity, that if she looked down at that table for even 3 seconds, 8 weeks of careful, silent work would be over before it had a chance to matter. I stepped, casually, into the space between her and the table, angling my body the way you'd angle yourself to block wind, not thinking, just reacting. "Client presentation for the hospital renovation," I said. "They want physical boards for the walkthrough. You know how the facilities committee is, nobody trusts a laptop." "Since when do you handle facilities committees?" There was something underneath her question. Not quite suspicion. More like the low hum of a person whose instincts are better than they'd been given credit for. "Since I got demoted to consultant and apparently inherited every task nobody else wants," I said, and let a little real, weary humor into my voice, because I'd learned by then that self-deprecation was the fastest way to make Vanessa relax. She liked me small. She liked me a little pathetic. It was the one costume she never questioned me wearing. It worked. Something in her shoulders eased. "God, I don't miss doing site walkthroughs," she said, almost warmly, like we were colleagues sharing a normal complaint, like she hadn't spent 8 months systematically dismantling my career. "I just left my charger. I'll be 5 minutes." I stood in that doorway making small talk about laminate finishes for what felt like an hour and was probably closer to 4 minutes, while she rifled through her old desk 2 rooms away. The second the front door clicked shut behind her, I sat down on the floor of that conference room, folders clutched against my chest, and stayed there until my hands stopped shaking. I moved everything to a storage unit across the river the next morning. I never brought a single physical document back into that building again until the morning of the meeting itself, carried in a bag I didn't let out of my sight. That was the closest she ever came to winning. I think about it more than almost anything else in this story, how thin the line was between the version of events I'm telling you now and a version where she found those folders, connected the dots 3 days early, and had enough time to disappear the evidence, or worse, rewrite the narrative first. Revenge built quietly is powerful. It is also, right up until the moment it's finished, extraordinarily fragile. The boardroom that morning had the particular tension of a space where everyone senses a performance is about to happen but doesn't yet know who's performing for whom. Our two minority investors, Grace Liu and Marcus Felt, sat at the far end, folders open, coffee untouched. Daniel sat at the head of the table, unusually quiet. Vanessa sat beside him, in a blazer the color of confidence, opening her laptop with the easy authority of someone who'd rehearsed every word she was about to say. I sat across from her. I'd chosen the seat deliberately. I wanted her to have to look at me while she spoke. "Thank you all for making time," Vanessa began, warm, polished. "Today I want to walk you through an incredible opportunity for Meridian's next chapter." She clicked to her first slide, the phrase "next chapter" again, the same one Daniel had used in September, and I understood, watching it appear in her deck, that it had always been her phrase, fed to him like a line in a play he didn't know he was performing in. She walked through the numbers, softened by months of quietly discounted contracts she now presented as evidence of strong client retention through relationship-first pricing. She walked through Holloway Capital's offer, framing it as a rare, almost accidental opportunity, a group that had stumbled across Meridian's potential through her professional network. She never mentioned she used to work there. She never mentioned the shell company. She talked for 11 minutes, and I let her finish every single word, because I wanted the record, the actual recorded minutes of this meeting, to contain her full, uninterrupted pitch, so that what came next would look exactly like what it was, not an ambush, but a correction. "Any questions before we open discussion?" she asked, closing her laptop with a soft, satisfied click. "I have a few," I said. The room's attention swung to me the way it had in September, except this time I wasn't the surprised one. I opened the folder in front of me, printed, deliberately old-fashioned, something you could hold up and pass around a table, harder to dismiss than a slide on a screen. "Vanessa, can you tell the room what Kate Strategic Partners LLC is?" The first crack showed in her face, small, a half-second flicker, the same one I'd seen in September, except this time I recognized it immediately for what it was. Fear trying to look like confusion. "It's my consulting entity," she said. "Standard practice." "It's a single-member LLC registered under your legal name, Vanessa Reddick," I said, sliding a copy of the registration across the table, with a mailing address shared by 2 other entities previously connected to acquisitions completed by Holloway Capital Partners. "The same firm you're proposing as Meridian's buyer today." "The same firm you worked for, as an employee, under the name Vanessa Reddick, 4 years ago." Grace Liu's pen stopped moving. Marcus Felt looked up from his folder for the first time since the meeting started. "That's..." Vanessa's voice had lost its polish, just slightly, just enough for anyone paying attention to hear. "That's not relevant to today's discussion. Plenty of consultants have varied backgrounds. It's relevant," I said, keeping my voice as level and pleasant as I had 8 months ago, because an independent forensic audit, triggered under Clause 11 of Meridian's founding agreement, a clause both founding partners are entitled to invoke ahead of any acquisition vote, found that your invoiced fees over the past 8 months total $211,000, structured in increments specifically designed to avoid requiring dual founder sign-off. It also found that your renegotiated client contracts reduced Meridian's effective valuation by an estimated 18% over the same period. Immediately before you presented an acquisition offer from your former employer. I slid the audit summary across the table. Elena had made sure the language was clean, factual, unimpeachable, no accusations, just numbers that told their own story. "This is a coordinated pattern," Daniel said, and I watched him say it, watched him choose, in front of investors and employees, to stand beside the facts instead of beside her. His voice shook slightly. "You told me you'd never worked with Holloway before. You told me directly, Vanessa." "Daniel," her voice cracked, "just once, the polish gone entirely now." "You lied to him," I said, quietly, not unkindly, which somehow landed harder than if I'd shouted it. "You lied to all of us. And I let you, for 8 months, because I needed you comfortable enough to keep making mistakes I could document." The room was completely silent. Grace Liu was the one who finally spoke. "I'd like a copy of that audit," she said. "And I'd like to understand exactly how much of the board's prior decisions were made based on numbers this individual manipulated." Vanessa looked around the table, at Daniel, who wouldn't meet her eyes anymore, at Grace and Marcus, whose faces had gone from polite interest to something closer to legal calculation, at Priya, whose expression was pure, quiet vindication. Then she looked at me. "You planned this," she said. Not a question. An accusation, though we both knew it wasn't really one. "I paid attention," I said. "You should try it sometime. It's very informative." Vanessa left the meeting before the board voted, and the vote itself took 11 minutes. Grace moved to terminate the Holloway Capital discussions entirely and to formally rescind Vanessa's title, effective immediately, pending review of the audit for potential legal action regarding the misclassified consulting fees. Marcus seconded it before Grace finished the sentence. She didn't come back to the office. Her desk was cleared by a facilities manager within 2 days, the leather portfolio she'd carried in on that first Tuesday nowhere among the boxes. But this isn't a story where the villain simply vanishes, and I don't think a story like that would satisfy anyone who's ever actually been betrayed. Real consequences take longer, and they come from more directions than you expect. Holloway Capital, once they learned their acquisition target had triggered an independent audit exposing an employee's undisclosed conflict of interest, quietly severed ties with Vanessa entirely, not out of any moral objection, Elena told me, but because a firm like that survives on discretion, and a scandal involving a former employee running a shell company kickback scheme was the kind of publicity that made future targets nervous. Robert, through an old contractor contact, heard that the family business in Milwaukee, the one that had gone through the same pattern 2 years earlier, got wind of the story through a small industry newsletter and began quietly exploring whether they had grounds for their own claim against Vanessa and Holloway both. I don't know how that resolved. I didn't ask. Some fires you start aren't yours to watch burn all the way down. Elena filed a formal demand for repayment of the misclassified consulting fees, backed by the audit. Vanessa settled rather than face a drawn-out legal fight, paying back a portion of the $211,000, though not all of it. These things rarely resolve as cleanly as you'd want, and I made peace with that faster than I expected to. The money was never really the point. The point was making sure the version of events that survived, in the industry, among the people who mattered, was the true one, not the one she'd been carefully constructing for 8 months. Back at Meridian, the days after the meeting were strange in a way I hadn't prepared for. I'd spent so long imagining the confrontation itself that I hadn't thought much about what came directly after. The 11 employees who'd watched their creative director get quietly sidelined for 8 months suddenly having to recalibrate everything they thought they understood about what had been happening around them. Priya came into my office that same afternoon and just stood there for a second, arms crossed, before she said, "You could have told me." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I needed it to stay small for as long as possible." I would have kept it small. There was real hurt in her voice, and I understood it, because trust is supposed to run both directions, and for 8 months I'd let her think I was simply enduring something instead of engineering a response to it. "You would have," I agreed. "But you also would have looked at me differently every day, and I needed everyone, including you, to keep looking at me the way Vanessa expected. Underestimated. Compliant. I needed that reputation intact until the exact moment it stopped being useful." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That's the loneliest smart thing I've ever heard," and hugged me, which undid something in my chest I'd been holding tight since March. The junior designer Vanessa had asked to pull the archived files. A 26-year-old named Oscar who'd been too new and too nervous to question a chief strategy officer's request, came to me separately, worried he'd be blamed for handing over sensitive material. I told him the truth, none of this was his fault, and the people who build these situations count on exactly that kind of quiet compliance from people without the power to refuse. I made sure, in the weeks that followed, that he knew his job was never in question. Somebody in that building deserved to feel safe again immediately, and it wasn't going to be me for a while yet. The hardest part of this story isn't Vanessa. It's Daniel, and I want to be honest about that, because a story where the husband is simply a villain too would be easier to tell and less true. He didn't fight for the marriage the way I fought for the company. Not really. In the weeks after that meeting, he apologized in the specific, exhausting way people do when the apology is really a request for reassurance. He told me he'd never actually, his word, crossed a line with Vanessa. I believe that's technically true. I also believe it doesn't matter nearly as much as he wanted it to. "I let her make me doubt you," he said, one night, sitting across from me at the same kitchen table where he'd once told me about acquisition talks like it was small news. "I let her tell me you didn't want to grow the business, that you were holding us back creatively, and I just believed it. Because it was easier than asking you directly." "Why was it easier?" He didn't have a good answer. I think, if I'm being fair to both of us, the honest answer is that our marriage had gone quiet in ways neither of us admitted to each other. Long before Vanessa arrived, two people who loved the same company more visibly than they'd loved each other in a while, and a woman like Vanessa doesn't create that kind of gap. She just finds it, and moves in. I didn't leave him out of anger. I left him, and I did leave, 6 weeks after that boardroom meeting, in a conversation that was far quieter than anything in this story so far, because trust, once you've had to build a legal case to protect yourself from your own husband's blind spots, doesn't come back just because the threat is gone. He cried. I didn't, not in front of him. I'd done all my crying alone, in a car in a parking garage, 3 months earlier. The one time I let myself feel the whole weight of it before going back into that office and continuing to smile. "Is there someone else?" he asked, which almost made me laugh, given everything. "No," I said. "There's just me." Finally paying attention to what I want, instead of what keeps everyone else comfortable. We sold our shared stake in the house. Meridian, by mutual agreement brokered by Elena, restructured so I retained majority creative and operational control, with Daniel staying on in a reduced financial role, not out of generosity on my part, but because untangling 8 years of shared work cleanly, without punishing 11 employees who'd had nothing to do with any of it, mattered more to me than symmetry in the divorce. The first few months after the restructuring were harder than the 8 months of scheming had been, in their own quiet way. Building a case gives you momentum. Rebuilding a life doesn't hand you the same clarity. I remember sitting in my new apartment, smaller than the house, mine in a way the house had stopped being mine long before Vanessa ever showed up, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, wondering if winning was supposed to feel more like this or less like this. Grief doesn't check whether you deserved the outcome before it shows up. Diane, the restaurant client who'd once told me, over salad, that I was stepping back, called me 2 weeks after the news filtered through the industry grapevine, the way these things always do. "I owe you an apology," she said. I said something thoughtless, and I didn't know I was repeating someone else's lie when I said it. "You didn't know," I told her. That's exactly how she wanted it to work. "I want to give Meridian our next 3 locations," she said. "All of them. Your name on the contract this time, not just the firm's." That contract became the first project I designed entirely under my own renewed authority, a project Vanessa would have called low-margin risk, 3 neighborhood spots instead of 1 flagship, the kind of work that builds a reputation slowly instead of all at once. I threw myself into it the way I used to throw myself into work in the very beginning, before 8 years of running a business had worn some of that instinct down to habit. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like making something instead of defending something. It's been 14 months since that boardroom meeting. Meridian is smaller than it was at its peak under Vanessa's inflated projections, and larger than it's ever been in terms of actual, honest value. We won a design award last spring for a community health center, the kind of project Vanessa would have called low margin and quietly deprioritized. I stood at the podium to accept it, and I thought about the woman who once told a junior designer, in front of me, that this industry doesn't reward sweet. I ran into Vanessa once, at an industry mixer neither of us expected the other to attend. She was working in-house somewhere now, a mid-tier consumer brand, a title with less shine than the one she used to hand herself. She saw me across the room and I watched her decide, in real time, whether to approach or avoid. She approached. "I'll give her that." "You look well," she said. "Careful. Testing the ground." "I am well," I said, and I meant it in a way that clearly unsettled her more than if I'd been cold. I never got the chance to say, she started, and then stopped, like she genuinely didn't know how to finish the sentence, because there wasn't a version of it that wouldn't be an admission. "You don't have to," I said. "I think we both know exactly what happened. I just made sure everyone else did too." I walked away before she could find her footing again. I didn't need the last word to be cruel. I needed it to be true, and true, I've learned, is so much harder for people like Vanessa to sit with than anger ever was. People ask me sometimes, usually other women, usually in the careful, half-embarrassed way you ask something you're actually asking for yourself, how I stayed so calm through all of it. How I didn't scream in that first meeting, didn't confront Daniel the night I found the LinkedIn printout, didn't do any of the things a betrayed woman is supposed to do in the stories we grow up believing. I tell them the truth, I wanted to scream. Every single day, for 8 months, some part of me wanted to burn the whole thing down loudly, publicly, immediately, the way it would have felt so satisfying to do in the moment. But loud anger gives people time to prepare a defense. Quiet attention doesn't give them anything at all. Vanessa was ready for a woman who'd fight her the way she expected, emotional, reactive, easy to paint as unstable or bitter in front of a room of investors. She was never ready for a woman who simply watched, and wrote everything down, and waited for the exact moment when the truth would do more damage than any accusation I could have shouted. That's the part one want people to remember, more than the audit, more than the boardroom, more than even Daniel. Not that I never felt the fury of watching someone try to take everything I built. I felt every ounce of it. I just decided my fury was worth more as evidence than as a scene. She underestimated the quiet ones. She won't make that mistake again, not because she learned humility, but because there aren't many rooms left that will still let her in. I never argued with the woman who ruined my life. I simply made sure that when the truth finally spoke, it spoke louder than she ever could.